Welcome, everybody, to this year's first episode of Untangled Vines, Redefining the Rules of Work. Today, I couldn't be more excited to introduce our guest with you today. He is a true trailblazer in the future of work conversations, Dave Cairns. Dave's journey has been anything but conventional. From ranking as one of the top 100 online poker tournament players in the world to now being a leading voice on the future of work. This is how it happened. After the poker world changed dramatically in 2011, Dave transitioned into office leasing, negotiating over 6 million square feet of leases for some of the largest global companies. Today, he's a future of work strategist at Kadence, where he's helping organizations adapt to the distributed by default model of work. Beyond his day job, Dave is an influential online writer, sharing bold and innovative takes on the future of the office market and the evolving dynamics of work and life. He's also a proud resident of Prince Edward Island, where he lives with his wife and daughter, embracing the benefits of truly distributed lifestyle. Join us as we dive into Dave's journey, explore his views on changing office landscapes, and uncover his vision for a world where distributed work creates more equal opportunities for all. Let's give a big welcome to Dave Cairns to the Untangled Vines community after this quick intro. Hey everyone, welcome back to Untangled Vines, Redefining the Rules of Work. Today, I'm excited about this episode. I've been following Dave on LinkedIn for a while and we finally connected. So Dave, thanks for being a part of the Untangled Vines community and thanks for being here today.
It's a pleasure, man. I'm like literally on the edge of my seat. I'm oscillating back and forth here, excited for the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have a good conversation and we're just going to dive into it. And so this is kind of where I was telling you I was going to start. I was speaking to somebody the other day and the topic of future of work came up, and obviously we probably hear that all the time. And he was mentioning that it's kind of become exhausted. And so I wanted to start here and get your take on your opinion of that. And if that's exhausted, where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, I'm exhausted by it. I'll just say it up front. I made a post about it actually like 4 or 5 days ago where I said something to the effect of return to office is the most exhausting conversation on the internet. Perhaps that's like a completely privileged thing to say. I should actually just remove perhaps. It's definitely a privileged thing to say. There are probably way more stressful and exhausting conversations out there than that, but we are in our little LinkedIn bubble. And I think in the LinkedIn world, it is exhausting. And I think it has become so exhausting because of the abnormal event that was COVID. And so what I mean by that is we got the future pulled forward way faster than it was supposed to naturally happen. I think that in the hearts and minds of particularly, employees, just like people, humans, all of us, we are living more in that future state than organizations are able to catch up to. And so what's natural, and I mean, I guess I'll call it unfortunate, is a regression to more of a mean, right? Like it's just not possible for the average organization to thrust themselves into a virtual first way of working and completely reimagine like the notion of place, of office, at all. Like for one, they're dealing with structural inefficiencies that are kind of out of their control in some cases, like leases that have yet to expire. Just simply the clunky nature of dealing in the physicality of work, like i.e. the places that people do it, like being able to modify those environments, reimagine like a network of space rather than central location. Like these are huge problems that do involve physical infrastructure and the economic systems that sort of support those, right? And so
Mhm.
all of that makes it not possible. And then there's the mindset side of it as well, right? Like it's it was one thing to work remotely in a health and safety crisis when there
Mhm.
was no other option but to do that. But as soon as that health and safety crisis lifts, you start to see entrenched thinking gain more traction again. Because
Mhm.
if we can return to the past, there are many people that want to, either from an ego perspective or just simply because it's quote unquote easier. Like change
Yeah.
management's really hard. So to try to round this point out, I think it's exhausting because we've talked at nauseum about a lot of these conversations, and there isn't really a lot of places left to go with some
Mhm.
of these topics. But yet here we are sort of stagnated in like back to, like a weird, bizarre reversion to the mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so like this podcast is Untangled Vines redefining the rules of work, and so like people like you and I, we are trying to redefine the rules of work. What do you think that we can do to talk about, I mean, because the future of work is something that a lot of people have kind of started to understand now, even though they're exhausted with it. But there's like
Hmm.
this terminology that we can say future of work or remote, hybrid, all that kind of stuff. What is it that we can do specifically, or is it even on us to push this forward where we make sure we don't make that regression back to the traditional 9 to 5 in office 5 days a week type work?
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's a difficult one to answer. But a few things did start coming into my brain as you were framing the question.
Mhm.
I really believe we need to spend a bit more time telling stories to one another,
Mhm.
than getting so granularly focused on like, policy data, office utilization data, productivity data, whatever. Um, like I'd rather so I'll give you two stories,
Mhm.
that I think just expose some of the issues. I started working on a project with, a really awesome young woman at my former company as I was transitioning out. She was put onto an assignment with me by her senior partner, and I'd never met her in person, never worked with her before. And we ended up collaborating with one another quite intimately in the sense that like we were working on a transaction together, trying to help a company sign a big lease. And what she ended up saying to me, probably two-thirds of the way through the work that we were doing together, which spanned months, she
Mhm.
said, I've learned more from you virtually in the way that we've been collaborating than I have in the entire 2 years that precedes this interaction going to the office every day.
Yeah.
And so I don't like why I say tell the story is it just opens up the opportunity to discuss what might be the root causes of those problems and how
Mhm.
do they maybe get resolved, and what might be what are the reasons that that interaction went well from this person's perspective and that they did feel they got training, mentorship, support, whatever, and how much of that's tied to place, how much of that's not tied to place. Like you could start to dissect and analyze it more from like an intellectually curious perspective than just like being obsessed with data. Like I think data matters, but I think we've like lost that more human side to this conversation. So that's just like one
Yeah.
anecdote. And then I'm also just like my own story. It's not to say it from like some ego place or anything, but like I've just started to live very differently.
Mhm.
I used to go to the office every single day.
Yeah.
Now I'm actually someone who needs offices, interestingly enough, in my travels to conduct business,
Yeah.
to either meet customers or do work while I'm traveling for work. So it's like I need office space,
Mhm.
just not in the way I used to and not with the same frequency.
Yeah.
Um, but deciding to leave an exit stage left from the like go to the office every day and sell a service that's tied to people, taking up more offices like I used to as an office leasing broker, and then coming and moving to like not even a secondary market, but like a tertiary market that is made up predominantly of like agrarian society, like people who work in farming or government
Yeah.
or retail and food services. And here I am, a knowledge worker working remote first on this island that I now live on, and I'm interacting in my business life and my personal life in vastly different ways than I was when I lived in a huge city and went to the office every day. And so, like, these different choices that anyone within an organization is making and finding a way to make work, you can tug on those and figure out how maybe you can apply some of those learnings or ways of working or living to a broader set of employees, or maybe even a company policy. You just pull things from it. Um,
Yeah.
and I think we don't do enough of that type of thing.
Yeah. I think from there, like in my head, because I listen to a lot of politics. This is not a political question, but
Mm-hmm.
I listen to a lot of politics, and in the United States, we had the election, right? And
Mm-hmm.
some people say that the election didn't go the way that they wanted to. I won't debate on that, but
Mm-hmm.
my point in bringing that up is, what do you think people like us might not be hearing clearly from the people who are still kind of enforcing RTOs or going back to that traditional way of working? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what are we maybe biased or like confirmation biased uh directed towards, where we hear this because we believe this way, but we're missing this point of people not thinking like us?
Yeah, I think the more digitally native you are as a person, the easier it is to like work location independent and asynchronously.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like more location independence and more asynchronous working are very much like long-term trends that we should expect to see more of in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the big blind spot is assuming that uh, other folks should just understand how to do those things as
Yeah.
easily as perhaps maybe someone like me or you might. So I was
Mm-hmm.
actually sitting in a boardroom back in February of 2023 in Toronto at Gensler, which is a office design and architecture firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there with a co-working operator that was looking to acquire more locations in Toronto. And I was trying to help them find some space.
Mm-hmm.
And Gensler was actually coming to a meeting with us as our design partner. So we went and met with the landlord, where we were like, hey, we want to bring this co-working opportunity to life, and this is what it looks like. And Gensler's our partner on it, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm sitting in this boardroom talking to like a guy who leads the Toronto office at this office architecture firm. Obviously, they're heavily biased towards
Yeah.
offices and in-person work and blah blah blah. But he said something to me that really has stuck with me ever since, and I was able to just like remove my own ego or trigger from it and just like listen to it. And one of the things he said is, he said, Dave, you are able to live and work the way that you do because you're naturally inclined to know how to connect with people
Mm-hmm.
digitally. You're digitally native. He's like,
Yeah.
don't underestimate how rare that actually is, up to and including young people. Like I
Yeah.
work, like I train and work with, people in their early 20s, and I can tell you they don't know how to connect through a screen in the way that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that can be a really big blind spot for anybody who's bought in. Like Phil Kirscher, my friend, who was at McKinsey and for the last few years, has a great line, which is that the future of work is virtual first, but not placeless.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I quite like that phrasing, and I can intuitively take myself in a number of different directions around what that might actually look like, what that might mean, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that concept that I can easily riff on is
Mm-hmm.
not very well understood by the average leader in a large company, and that's not a knock on them.
Yeah.
Like it's I've come to realize how naive I was to think that folks could or would catch up to this kind of stuff. And it's like I spend a lot of my day, an hour, maybe 2 hours a day, sometimes, depending on my week, like just reading up on
Yeah.
all this stuff. And so you take that for granted, That's what I would say.
Yeah. And yeah, so you kind of touched on the question that I was going to ask about that as you were talking about that guy saying, what was the word you said? Digitally
Digitally native.
native. Yeah,
Yeah.
because my first thought was, is it generational? Does it like I think the baby boomers are starting to retire, and then what is it, Gen X, I think,
Gen
and
X
then
after that, then millennial, and then Gen Z. Yeah.
yeah, and like somebody outwardly looking at this, I'm millennial, and
Same.
I'm thinking that like Gen Z, oh, they're gonna love what we're building over here because it's very social oriented. But what that person was saying is, we can't take that at necessarily face value. We have to. So it sounds like there's a training or education piece that we have to apply to this to continue down the direction that we're going now. Am I hearing that correct?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because like the reason I became more digitally inclined or able to do all this stuff that we're doing right now with more ease is because I chose a path in my life before I got into office leasing that was professional poker, and I
Yeah,
ended up training myself, not intentionally, but just by virtue of the vocation that I chose
yeah,
in collaborating online and building relationships online and learning how to establish trust online, etc. And that is my point, is that that is not something that you can just broad strokes paint a brush of
mhm,
saying, well, if you're young and you were born into social media, you should inherently understand and know how to do all of that. That's actually
yeah,
not at all the case.
yeah. That that's a good point because yeah, I mean, if you don't take the time to think about it, you kind of assume like, oh yeah, we're just gonna lead in this direction because this is like Gen Z is the first generation where they've
Hmm.
always had the internet, they've always had social media, they've always had YouTube, that kind of stuff. Um, what just kind of like following on this, what do you think? Is there like how do we solve this gap from that education? Is it we're going to create like a new role? Is it AI? Is it the way that we design and operate companies with a mixture of like, yeah, you can do a lot of things remote, but then we're also going to have spaces around you, like co-working spaces around you. Is it a mixture of all those? What comes to your
Well,
mind there?
it's a boring answer, but I think it's just a matter of time. And I go back to my original comment up top of this conversation, which is um, we got pulled too far into the future too fast, and then we
Yeah.
got pulled back. It's unnatural, but like I was talking to my buddy Phil yesterday,
Hmm.
and we were talking about how like you don't say you're going on the internet anymore.
Yeah.
You go like I'm buying a book or
Yeah.
connecting with this person, I'm listening to a podcast, or you just say what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that same he was referencing this in relation to hopefully in 2025 we actually start to just say what we're doing while using AI. So
Yeah.
rather than being like I'm using AI to do this, it's just like, well, I'm doing this thing and it's powered by AI.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if we tug on that, I think the same is just sort of like universally applicable across, like decentralizing the office and making it more of a network than
Hmm.
one particular location, or uh, like how do we upskill leaders on how to document,
Yeah.
things better online so that it's more inclusive, more accessible to people.
Hmm.
How do we figure out how to gather with intention rather than just sitting proximate to one another, shoulder to
Yeah.
shoulder in the office? Like these things just unfortunately take time,
Yeah.
and we got pulled forward too fast, and so I think that's why we have all this like tension and like angst about like wanting it to be different. And frankly, Zach, like I struggle greatly
Hmm.
with like I'm almost I'm trying to like give advice to myself right now because like you could see me off camera, like swearing or like lamenting my frustration to my wife about how like I just wish things could move faster or be different.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but that's just not reality.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was actually talking to my founding advisor earlier today, and he was telling me about I think he mentioned Cisco. I could be wrong, so if I am, just drop it in the comments and yell at me. But
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about how I think it was Cisco had this hologram product, and it was kind of like this half circle where you could have three people sitting at that hologram, and then if the other company had um that same technology, they would fill the circle with the other three people and it would all be a hologram. And that was like 2011 or before, and so obviously that was before its time. And so it sounds like, I don't know if you feel this way, but like I've been a studier of the workplace since, like, I say 2016 because that's when I did my undergrad, and that was my thesis paper. But I always feel like we're playing catch up with what the data or the studies say, in terms of, I always reference the job characteristics model by Jackman and Odom. And that was in 1976. And it told you pretty much how employees were motivated. They were more likely to be satisfied in their organization or their position, and they were more productive. And so, like, we knew some of these frameworks out there, and it took us, even today, we're still trying to make this a reality. But I mean, we've made great strides. But what do you think makes us continue to stay back? And I guess, like, maybe the answer is like change management, and we're used to what we know, and the unknown is scary. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I start with the structural issues that are really, really hard to shift, right? Like there's an incredible amount of pressure on organizations to maintain office footprints from like a city tax perspective,
Mm,
like from like literally keeping the lifeblood of that market going, because
yeah.
we've built up cities in such a way where offices drive a meaningful amount of tax revenue and end up being a beacon for a lot of the entertainment and retail that kind of happens in and around those downtowns, right?
Yeah.
And what happens when uh, offices are no longer extracting the kind of tax revenues that they were?
Mm,
All of a sudden, your home taxes on your residential property go up,
yeah.
and on and on and on. And so, like, you think of like really large organizations like Amazon that
Mhm.
have commitments on their HQ2 in Virginia to make good
Yeah.
on. Like, they need to be there with meaningful workforce in place. Like, these are structural economic issues
Yeah.
that I think, you can't underscore how relevant they really are. Now, obviously, organizations, particularly public organizations that are beholden to public markets, um, are looking to like reduce costs in
Hmm.
whatever ways they can. So I'm not here to like say organizations aren't trying to find ways to consolidate the real estate holdings that they have. They
Hmm.
are. But those big structural issues are huge, particularly in government. You're seeing it, right? Like you're seeing it in the U.S. government. Like, on the one hand, I think you got like Elon Musk, who just wants to trim the fat the way that he
Yeah.
did at Twitter. But then on the whether there's an ulterior motive actually to get people back into the office for some of the reasons that I just mentioned, like,
Hmm.
you know, who knows? He has called it morally wrong to work from home when everybody else is working from an office or
Yeah.
from a factory or whatever the case may be. Um, but yeah, then you get beyond those sort of structural layers, and it becomes a change management issue. And I think it
Mhm.
really, at the end of the day, that's really tugging on a human nature issue, right?
Yeah.
So like, how did I change careers, right? When the rubber just hit the road and I had to,
Hmm.
did I change careers when I became unhappy in 2017 at the job that I was doing? No, it took me till 2024 to
Yeah.
actually make a change, even though I knowingly was unhappy. in
Yeah.
2017, right? And so, like, we're human. Organizations are run by human beings. We resist change till we're blue in the face. And it usually takes an externality
Yeah.
to truly change. Um, so, yeah, I'm kind of
Yeah.
rambling at this point. I hope I've given you something there, but
No, yeah. Because you brought up some good points because, like, again, like, as people like us who are already at that futuristic stage, we see the future that we think is going to happen, and we want other people to follow in line, not in like a conformity approach, but because there are actual benefits, family, uh, well-being for your own self, cost, commute time.
Mhm.
So there's like a lot of those things that we constantly drive, and you're bringing up some good points on, like, I mean, Amazon saying that they want people back into their headquarters by January, like next month, 2025. And my problem with that, and it, this is where I get like in the background talking to my wife or my coworkers or friends, and I'm like, do they think we're stupid? Like, it's not you're not bringing people back in because of culture or productivity, right? I even said this in one of we do a future of work weekly report every single week, and we covered the Amazon RTO,
Mhm.
and I actually complimented Andy Jassy on his approach in his long memo that he sent out to the company. But there was one part that was missing for me, and that was the data to tell the story that the reason we're coming back in is because of productivity or because of culture or because we want to be more innovative and faster. And like, Amazon is a huge data organization. And so if anybody had that data, it would be them, and they didn't put it out there, or at least I didn't see it. And so I don't know if you have any
I
thoughts on
don't think
that.
they think we're stupid. I don't think they care. Um,
That's another thing.
so,
Yeah.
like, like I just watched a documentary on Netflix about the overconsumption that
Mm,
is the Western world and North American society, right?
yeah.
And what is Amazon guilty of? Dumping totally brand new products
Yeah.
into waste. That like they're just dumping stuff that could be donated, or
That's
they
true. Yeah.
shouldn't have been made in the first place. So it's like, like, I don't believe that they care. And it's interesting to really, like, if you really unpack it, like, I don't think they're stupid either. I think they
Yeah.
know that by enforcing RTO, they are going to lose some of their top talent, because the
Yeah.
most marketable people are the ones that can obtain flexibility, and they'll go look for it elsewhere. I don't think they're dumb enough to think that that's not an inevitability of their approach. But with with the world that we live in today, some of these organizations are so large and
Hmm.
so powerful by their very nature that it's like seemingly impossible for them to fail. And
Yeah.
I think that that's almost a backstop of a really large company to go, yeah, we're going to lose some of our best people, but you know what? We got to cut costs right now. That's
Yeah.
what we got to do. How can we easily do that? Force people to go back to the office. They're going to quit,
Yeah.
like, and then there's also still the backdrop of, like, we got to make good on our HQ too. And, like, we have, like, like, meaningful, like, connection to the political sphere as a huge employer. And, like, where we can create critical mass of people, we're going to do our damnedest to do that because of, like, our strategic relationships and things like that. So, like, that's the world we live in. That's reality.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to stay on this topic, because I want to get your thoughts, because a lot of people see like Amazon's RTO, or like you mentioned, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy talking about remote workers coming back into the actual office for government professionals, and then a lot of people relate that to, okay, this is it, this is where remote work breaks off, this is where hybrid breaks off, because people are going to follow suit of Amazon or Doge.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
what are your thoughts on that? Is that
That's
too,
just following
yeah,
the headlines and following the divisive nature of social
yeah,
media. Because I think as much as I said in this conversation, we should tell more stories. We also need to pay attention to data and return to office utilization data. When I say utilization, I mean not whether a building has X vacancy in it. I mean
mhm,
how many people show up, badge in, and use it, right?
yeah,
So since the beginning of 2023, utilization data has remained flat. How many RTO pushes have there been since then? An inordinate number. And I
yeah,
made a post on this the other day. Like here's the company X did it in January 2023. Company Y did it in October. And I cited each one of them.
yeah,
And after that, I wrote, and work from home still remains 5 times higher than it did
yeah,
pre-pandemic. And so, like, what I would say is that it's naive as well to get caught up in these headlines because flexible and remote working was already a long-term trend before COVID. It's
yeah,
been massively accelerated because of it. It's
yep,
now kind of flattened out at roughly 5 times higher than what it was pre-pandemic. And that is meaningful, by the way, because that data is inclusive of essential and frontline roles. And
yeah,
so when you factor that into the equation, the knowledge economy has had a much higher than 5x increase in, let's just call it, working away from a central office, whether that exclusively means home or it means a
mhm,
myriad of other places and ways of working. It's meaningfully higher than 5x, right?
yeah,
And so Nick Bloom is known for saying, it's up 5 6x. It's now flat as a pancake.
mhm,
But as technology continues to improve, we're likely to then see incremental increases from that 5x number up again. And he thinks that starts to rear its head in sort of 2027, 2028, into the
yeah.
2030s. And to me, that just makes a lot of intuitive sense.
Yeah, yeah. Like whenever we started building Grapevine, we did market research and market analysis, and the digital workspace environment, the CAGR was like 28.6, and so that's year over year, and it was going from like a two-digit billion number to a triple-digit billion number by 2030. And I remember Nick Bloom in one of his, it was either an interview or a report that he was writing or research paper. And he was saying that his take on 2024 is that we will see somewhat of a plateau, but then it will start to take off, kind of like what you're saying here. And hopefully like companies like ours, Grapevine and Cadence,
Mm-hmm.
that you work with as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that somehow uh, there's some type of blend between co-working spaces and a tool like Grapevine, where it's really making flexibility easier than it ever has been. Where if you want to book a space or a room for the day, or however you guys operate, you're able to do that. Or I even see the future where, and maybe you guys do this, you can talk to where you kind of give each individual employee a budget on a monthly basis, where like if they want to go into the office, they have this allotted amount of budget, and they're able to go in there, and companies can kind of use that as you were mentioning, like tax, I don't know if you said write-offs or not, but something like that, where it kind of, for the company itself, they're able to use that as the tax deductions versus actually having a physical and larger lease amount underneath for their overhead.
Yeah. Well, I think that, like, long term, what you're really describing is putting the office effectively into an employee's pocket and
Yeah,
making it accessible to them on demand. That's
yeah,
basically what you're talking about. And then you're talking about technology being able to nudge behavior,
mm-hmm.
to be like, hey, so and so's over here. You might want to go collaborate with them or connect with them. Like,
Yeah,
you can book a space really easily. Bing, bang, boom.
yep,
I love that. But if I'm going to be dead honest, I was more romantic about that future arriving a couple of years ago than I am today.
Mm.
And I'll cite some of the reasons why it's going to take longer, in my
Yeah.
opinion, than we might all like it to. And the first and foremost reason is all that structural stuff. So office buildings are valued on long-term leases from high credit tenants.
Yeah.
And so like JP Morgan is the perfect tenant, right? Someone who can come in, lease the building for 25 years, and the landlord can go, I can just set it, forget it. I
Yeah.
know this company's going to pay the bills whether they're occupying the space or not, right? That's how valuation methodology is
Mhm.
underpinned. And
Yeah.
why I'm not very optimistic about that changing anytime soon is it hasn't meaningfully changed in the residential market, even though Airbnb's been around since what, 2008, 9,
Something like, yeah.
whatever it's been around for. I went and got a mortgage on an investment property. It's going to be it is an Airbnb. And I
Mhm.
struggled to find a lender because they wouldn't lend on
Yeah.
Airbnb. And so if we're a decade or more into on-demand access to residential real estate and the capital market side of things hasn't figured out a way to value it better,
Mhm.
I'm not very optimistic about the commercial side of the equation
Yeah.
figuring that out in the short term. And where I'm going with that is it basically stalls out the growth of the co-working sector, because
Mm.
co-working operators are trying to sign management agreements with landlords where
Yeah.
there is no committed lease revenue, right?
Yeah.
And so landlords, even if they want to do that, they're capped in the amount of that building that can be made available on an on-demand basis, because if they go
Yeah.
above a certain threshold, the valuation gets skewed so negatively for them that they can't meet
Yeah.
their financial objectives. So that's the structural side of it.
Mhm.
Then there's the cultural side of it. And the issue there is that the prevailing, and I'm going to get to something more positive by the end of this, so fear
No,
not.
this
But
is good.
so the cultural side of it is a real challenge because for better and for worse, not or, but I'm going to say and, for better and for
Mhm.
worse, the office, the central office, the branded office, the one that has the name on the door of the company, that is considered a cultural shrine for an organization. It's like a
Yeah.
gathering place, like how we used to be tribal, like that's at least the mentality around it. And
Yeah.
so companies don't want their employees dispersed in a myriad of different on-demand locations.
Yeah.
Some do, but it's happening around the edges right now. It's
Yeah.
not a, it's not something that large organizations are trying to solve for at scale.
Mhm.
They want to get people back into those cultural shrines, right?
Yeah.
And we could debate the merit of that till we're blue in the face, but I'm just more talking about the reality of it.
Yeah.
But where I think that things start to change, and this is always just, it's slower than you want it to be. And I'll cite some Flex Index data here. So
Yeah.
something like, I forget the figure, but it's like 90% plus companies that were formed 2011 to today have a fully flexible work policy. So if you founded the company 2011 to now, whether
Yeah.
you have an office or you don't have a mandate of any kind.
Yeah.
It's employees' choice what they do. And so what that really just tugs on is that the younger the company, the more amenable they are to flexibility. Why are they more amenable to flexibility? Because they're more digitally enabled. They
Yeah.
run their businesses virtual first.
Yeah.
Their hiring practices have become increasingly distributed within the confines of accounting and legal practices. And I think that you'll start to just see that tape play forward even more. Like, I can cite a real life example. I was talking to a potential customer for Kadence last week. Our product is geared more towards HQ management. We do make available the ability to book on-demand spaces through our platform, which is great. We're
Yeah.
invested in that future, but we're predominantly an HQ management system. And this company has nobody going to their San Francisco office. So there's a surplus of space and nowhere close to enough demand.
Mm.
Their New York office, though, had just come up to lease expiry. And what are they doing? They're dumping that lease completely. It's gone. And
Yeah.
they're moving to a co-working model where they're going to sign a lease with WeWork on an annual basis for a significantly reduced footprint. So I'm
Yeah.
making this up. If they've got 100 employees in the market, they might literally carry 10 desks, a 10 desk office.
Yeah.
and then give the have WeWork's got the ability to give all access passes to people that maybe can't find their way into that space that's leased by the company
Yeah.
on a given day if they show up and it's full. Um, so when you look at that, that's a company that started pre-pandemic with the office first mentality, but was small enough and nimble enough and virtual first enough to go, well, this doesn't make any sense anymore, so we're going to go more virtual.
Yeah.
You've got some companies that are doing that. Dropbox is a great example of a company
Mhm.
that's done that. But again, these are very rare examples of companies that have reached maturity, that have flipped the script and gone that other way. But the
Yeah.
younger companies are going to increasingly behave that way. And
Yeah.
that fundamentally changes the amount of space you need, the duration it's being used, and the whole role or purpose of a central office altogether. So I don't think it's going away, a central office.
Mhm.
I think it's being redefined and shrunk down quite a lot. Last thing I'll say on this is, like, I think there's a company out there that I think has a really cool policy. They're called Nubank, based in Brazil, and they have like 1 week out of every 12 that's super immersive, where they require
Yeah.
employees to come on site and immerse themselves in collaboration, connection, and with the brand in one of
Yeah.
their leased or owned spaces. The rest of the time, they let people work wherever they want, and you come into the office 5 days of the week if you want to.
Yeah.
But there's no requirement or policy to do that. Now, it'll be interesting to see how those companies start to reimagine and their real estate holdings, because a lot of them are just trying to make good in a new model with a
Yeah.
lease that they signed a couple of years ago that still's got 7 or 8 years left on it. So would they necessarily lease the same amount of space or do it in the same way if they just started with a shotgun approach tomorrow, with no space? I think the answer is clearly no.
Yeah.
So I'll end this statement just by saying there's so much of the story that hasn't played out yet, um,
Yeah.
for that reason.
And there's a lot of things that I don't think people have, or maybe they have tried it. We just maybe it failed, or it just hasn't worked yet. Because one of the things that you were talking about, whenever you were talking about the on demand space being a little bit more difficult, I went immediately to like the McDonald's model with real estate. So I mean, their money isn't in the actual McDonald's, or it wasn't. I think now it is. But they bought the real estate,
Hmm.
put the company on top of it, and then
Hmm.
franchised it out. So I almost wonder if somebody, because this is where I think WeWork messed up, where like they don't own the spaces that they own. They lease the space
Hmm.
that they act like they own. And
Yeah.
so whenever you sell them, it's I mean it's an established company. I think they've like been able to turn around their brand enough where people trust it again. But I just wonder, like, is there an opportunity where somebody, because I think about this, like
The
we were,
McDonald's model. Yeah, you're thinking like, yeah.
yeah, because
So
I was
yeah.
just going to say this part first, because I think the opportunity is urban locations more so, or rural locations rather than urban, because that's where WeWork lives, right? And so, but is there enough demand in a rural area? So it's kind of like this catch-22. But you go ahead.
Well, yeah. No, I like where your head is at with it in the McDonald's model. The challenge, I think, again, comes back to the fact that uh, restaurants are a very well understood
Yeah,
thing to value,
that's
right?
true.
We know how to value a McDonald's. And so it's easy for McDonald's to ultimately become a real estate company. That's what they really are, a real
Yeah,
estate company. But they can go and get financing and they can go and expand with a lot more ease than in the commercial office world.
yeah,
And it's funny because, like, people will say, like, oh, well, like, hotels are nightly stays and they value, you value hotels, no problem. And
yeah,
I would say, yeah, but we've not proven yet that
yeah,
hotel valuers have walked down the halls to their office counterparts and said, well, this is how it works. And, like, let's just like make it commonplace. And
yeah,
so I think that's an issue. The other part that you're talking on is like, where should they be? How should it function in the sense of like either urban or rural? And
yeah,
I don't claim to know the answer to that, but what I have heard quite a bit is for companies that do make it possible to go and book co-working spaces on demand for
Hmm.
employees, like they offer it as an amenity or a perk.
Yeah.
um, the vast majority of them are not doing it to perform any form of remote work or heads down work. They're just
Mhm.
staying home, even though they're being offered that option to go to a third party workspace and have it paid for. They're
Yeah.
only showing up in these on demand spaces when there's some sort of team gathering opportunity that's been facilitated by the company and then they've been asked to attend.
Yeah.
And so I'm just sort of coming back to that idea of like human nature, and I wonder how much of that plays a role in stalling out the progression of what you're describing as well. Um,
Yeah.
I actually think we need to teach people how to live and work differently in a more digital world,
Hmm.
because our natural inclinations are going to be to stay home. But
Yeah.
even if we're not going to a central workplace to interact with our peers shoulder to shoulder, I think it is essential that we do leave our homes
Yeah.
and go other places.
Yeah.
But the infrastructure is not there to support it. Organizations haven't retrained people on the importance of it and how it impacts their mental health or whatever the case may be. So
Hmm.
it's super nuanced, because right now, I think as much as I'm very much a proponent of flexible and even remote working,
Hmm.
I don't think that we really grasp some of the negative downstream implications of like staying home all the time.
Yeah.
Do I think that we solve our problems by simply returning to the office and that people weren't already lonely at the
Yeah.
office? Like, absolutely, people were lonely surrounded by all kinds of other people.
Yeah.
Like that's true also. But I think I'm just trying to challenge myself to be a little bit more balanced about it, take myself out of my own vantage point, maybe of being more digitally native,
Hmm.
being someone who can work flexibly across like a 24-hour day rather than a linear 9 to 5 day. And
Yeah.
then I have an inclination to figure that out on my own. And then also just being honest, like, are there weeks where I'm like, you know what, I could do with a lot more in-person interaction than I've got going on right now? The
Yeah.
answer is yes. Are there other weeks though where I'm like, oh my God, thank God I can just like work in
Yeah.
solitude? I'm like, yeah, fucking right. So it's both, right? But it's just like having the self-awareness and learning how to check yourself is challenging. And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of people they need support. Like they need support to get that right. And the
Yeah.
employer has an important role in that, and they haven't really heeded that call yet.
Yeah, and I think that's where like I can't remember the exact titles, but there's some I think it's like workplace strategists that are coming to light, and there's these different obviously there's tons of like companies out there like Calm or Headspace that could be implemented into the organization that helps, but yeah, I mean teaching people it's almost like the new way of operating, where we can't just assume kind of going full circle here. We can't assume that people are digitally native. And so we have to teach them to be able to do that. And that also might include the certain areas that you're talking about. Like, okay, yeah, you have the flexibility to work from home or go into the office. It's probably good to at least go into the office once every 2 weeks. I'm just making things up here, but
Yeah,
like once
yeah,
every 2 weeks because it's good for your well-being. It's good to do this. Or on the weekends, make sure that you hit up a friend and like go out with them, do something. And then so I think we can kind of close it out here since we're going full circle. Um is there anything that we haven't discussed that you wanted to make sure that the people who might listen to this hears directly
yeah,
from you?
yeah. Well, one of the biggest things that I'm thinking about lately is my role as a parent. Um,
Mm,
so I lamented the fact that my father was never around.
mm,
I'm around a lot more. What I'm realizing is that I'm physically present but emotionally unavailable a lot of the time.
Ooh, yeah.
And these phones that have apps on them that are designed to make us addicted are a huge part of that.
Hmm.
And I think that one of the fundamental, like the meme of the millennial generation could be just that they were physically present but emotionally unavailable.
Yeah.
And I mean, I say millennial just because like we're square in being the parent generation right now, like,
Yeah.
or at least, like where I'm raising a 6-year-old, and the ones that come in behind me and that are going to work, millennials are the predominant parent generation.
Hmm.
So that's on my mind a lot. And it's very interesting to witness my daughter look at me and go, Dad, get off your phone.
Yeah.
She's 6.
Yeah.
Like it's super powerful when your child gets to an age where they can convey that frustration and emotion with you. And so, yeah, I think it's the biggest challenge of our time,
Hmm.
phone addiction, social media addiction, and trying to straddle the bar of like what makes that useful and valuable in our lives. I mean, if it wasn't for social media, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Sure.
I wouldn't have the job I have. I wouldn't be able to live where I live, blah, blah, blah. But simultaneously, it's very toxic.
Hmm.
The only thing I'd say about LinkedIn that I think has any saving grace to it at the moment is that most of the ads that you get served up are business to business ads. And
Yeah.
so you're not like someone's not reaching into your pocket on LinkedIn and tugging on your biggest emotional and fear-based insecurities the
Hmm.
way that happens on, say, Instagram or TikTok.
Yeah.
Luckily, that's not happening, but we're still addicted to our notifications, and we are a very distracted bunch. So yeah, I sometimes can go into shame on this and go
Hmm.
down a wormhole on that, but I'm really just trying to be honest about it and figure out ways that I can make sure that I don't end up that meme to myself and not
Yeah.
pass my own rocking chair test, right? Which is like, I don't want her to look at me one day, my daughter, and go like, yeah, you were here, but you weren't here, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's a big thing, and maybe it goes into the type of training that we do because, and I think we can close it out here, but like
Mhm.
because it is very important to understand the difference between work and life, even though that they are very much blended right now.
Mhm.
Because I could be working here as a remote person, go on my phone, just scroll, and then go back to work, and then that could go from the beginning of the day all the way to the end of the night. And so maybe, I mean, I don't know if it's the workplace to implement this into their training, but I wouldn't oppose it in my opinion. And so I don't know, maybe we just came up with
Well, I
something
think
we could work on.
we're all guinea pigs is the thing,
Yeah,
right? Like,
that is true.
the modern internet is the Wild West and it's got no guardrails on it. But the thing that I think is really interesting is looking at this Gen Alpha, which is my daughter,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Um, we at least can convey the dangers of phones and phone
yeah,
addiction to our children, but they then play it back to us. They go, you tell me this
yeah,
thing's toxic, and here you are using it in a toxic way. So I like the dance of the millennial alpha
yeah,
parent child dynamic. And I'm really interested to see how they, in particular, evolve with a lot of the knowledge and guardrails that are starting to come to fruition around all of this. I mean,
yeah.
because of unfortunately what Gen Z in particular has had to hold the bag on, which is
Mhm.
being thrust into the high speed app world
Yeah,
while still in high school, and nobody being there to support them uh,
yeah.
through the challenges of being an adolescent while being on these platforms.
And you get the misconception of what people's real lives are.
Hmm.
And so I think it actually, which I think is what you're kind of getting at, is like the
Yeah.
psychological defects. I don't know if that's the right word, but like the misdirection that it sends people along where maybe at a young age your amygdala, your prefrontal cortex isn't like fully developed, and so you don't have the full decision making that you need to make the appropriate decisions. And if you're constantly directed going in this way over time, by the time that those are developed, you still are already manipulated in a sense. And so yeah, I think we're on the same playing field right there, on the same page.
I went deep on the end of it. Sorry, but you asked me, and I
No,
mean
that's good.
that's what I'm thinking about right now a lot.
No, that's good, because I mean, we're about to have a kid in February.
Yeah.
And so it's a good reminder to me personally to I'm not like somebody who's always on their phone, but there are times, like everybody, I think, like if somebody says that they don't, then they're lying. But you get in the dead scroll or whatever they call it, and then you look up and it's like an hour later, hour and a half later, and you're like, what could I have been doing? And maybe that's spending time with my kid or my wife or our dog, versus scrolling through somebody, like the feed that for people that I don't even really care about.
No, for sure. And it shortens your attention span and makes you more inwardly focused in an ego-driven way. And so like it permeates, man, through you could not even have your phone out, but be in a conversation with your partner and almost go like, well, this is boring. Like anyway, we could rabbit hole this, but it's a big issue, and I think it's one that deserves way more open conversation than it gets.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap it up right here. Cause it does factor into it though, because like I said earlier, like the more that we do work remotely or flexibly, maybe we're working on our phones and right next to it is the app. And so to like kind of bring this whole thing together, I think that like the future of work, to use the word that exhausted, is really looking at all these things that we just discussed: the infrastructure, social media, new tools out there, and training and education on the new way of working, and combining all this together to hopefully create a better working world. So that's how I would summarize this.
It's good. You put a good pin in it. I like it. Thank you for the time. I mean, I really value these conversations because it just gets me to just like continue to audit my own thinking. That's really what it does,
Well, we appreciate you being here, and I'm excited to get this out. So thanks, Dave, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk.
Yeah, man. Thank you.